So what are some of the pricing techniques that companies use? We've already talked about low cost and skimming and neutral pricing. And so some strategies they use are what you do with penetration pricing is you do it just so you can get into the market, and then you raise the price later. There's psychological pricing. Yes, the reason why they have that 95 and 97 is because people have this thing about odd numbers, that they think odd numbers are stronger than even numbers, and that's part of the reason why they go ahead and do that. Personally, my favorite numbers are 7, 5, and 3. All prime numbers. Economics, essentially the three. Do you want to make a marginal profit close to cost? Are you going for an ROI, or are you going to raise it later? Decoy pricing, you raise or lower the price on one thing to affect another. And finally, digital, and that's based on time or freemium. Now, we've talked about perception pricing. Is there really such a thing? The average semiconductor makes a 50% profit, and that means that you sell for double than what it costs. That's a 50% margin. However, Intel, which is a strong brand, sells their semiconductors at a 64% margin. And you see it again with consumer electronics and Apple, Teva Pharmaceuticals, which most of you've never heard of, versus Johnson & Johnson. So this is why branding is so important, because people pay for brands. And so this summarizes everything we've talked about, how all the 5 C's affect how you go about pricing, and it asks questions that you're interested in. In terms of startups, how do I figure out my startup pricing? Well, it's pretty much the same thing. Figure out what your landscape is, come up with a hypothesis, see if reference points exist. How am I going to price? Am I going to do it value-based, or am I going to do it cost-based? And then I need to go out and validate and get some data. And then I need to think about how is my pricing going to change over time. If I'm in a competitive market, I'm probably going to face pressure to lower my prices. Here are some common pricing models that people use, whether it's physical, software, or service. For example, if you're in the services, some of your payments are tied to milestones. That's called tranching. And so once you meet a milestone, then you get paid. Software, you're familiar with subscriptions or ads and that sort of thing. The thing about pricing and the perception of value is that it can get complicated. But the thing to be careful about is if you establish a reference point, keep in mind it's going to be hard to take back. So you want to limit your customers' exposure to that price point until you know for sure. What do big companies do? Big companies actually do supply and demand curves. They go out, they get data, and based on that, that tells them where they should price. So you're sitting there and say, well, Dr. Cho, what about perception pricing? And so our perception of pricing is affected by, is there a reference point? Is it framing? Or does it touch on behavioral economics? That changes how we perceive that pricing. Our perceptions go into our values. And so how much are we going to value it? Economically, utility, emotion. And finally, is the value proposition? Is it going to bring gain into my life? Is it going to reduce loss, meaning pain? Or is it going to allow me to do things I've never done before, like capability? And so that's the crux of perception. So when we look at pricing, this pretty much sums up everything. First of all, we know that pricing affects the entire mix. So pricing is just part of my strategy. Now, one way about going with pricing is I can do it data-driven. Based on all these different techniques of data, what I can do is that I can design a cost for it. And based on the 5 C's, I can pick a cost. Another way I can use pricing is for offense, and that's where I'm going to use penetration or skimming, where I'm going to attack tiers. I'm going to start selling at a low-level product instead of just high. And so that's how I could use pricing. Or I could use pricing for defense. That's it. Let's just match our competition. We know we have the better product, but let's not make pricing an issue. I can bundle with other companies. I can promote. So this is how all of pricing fits together. And so what I've learned is that the 5 C's impacts pricing in a lot of ways. And that it's all about either value pricing or cost pricing. So I need to earn, and cost pricing in general sets the bottom floor, because this is a minimal I could sell it for. But ideally I want to be in value-based pricing. Entrepreneurial businesses are very vulnerable to price changes because people don't know you. So if they drop the price on you, you have to be prepared to respond to that. And that's why it's so important to pick the right cult.